Captain Li Wu-jin stood on the bridge of the merchant vessel New Dawn, watching the massive alien space station grow larger on the main screen. His hands were steady on the control panel, but his heart beat faster than usual. This was humanity's first official contact with the Karathi Empire, and everything had to go perfectly. "Distance to the station, Minsu?" Li asked his navigator. Park Minsu checked his instruments carefully. 2,000 kilometers in closing, Captain. Their ships are surrounding us, but they're keeping their distance. Li nodded. Through the viewing port, he could see the Karathi patrol ships. They looked like giant metal insects with sharp edges and glowing weapon ports. Each ship was twice the size of the New Dawn, and there were 12 of them forming a circle around the human vessel. "Any messages from them, Dahai?" Li turned to his communications officer. Kim Dahai adjusted her headset and shook her head. "Nothing yet, Captain. They're scanning us with some kind of energy beam, but no words. Keep trying to reach them. Use the basic greeting we practiced," Li said. He walked over to where Choi Tae-ho was studying his data pad. "Tae-ho, remind me what we know about their customs." Choi Tae-ho looked up from his notes. "The Karathi are a warrior species, Captain. They value strength and honor above all else. They've built an empire across 30 star systems through conquest. Their society is ruled by kings who prove their worth through combat." "And they've never had peaceful contact with any other species?" Li asked. "Never, sir. Every species they've met has either submitted to their rule or been destroyed. We're the first to request trade instead of offering surrender." Li took a deep breath. The Terran Federation had chosen him for this mission because of his experience with difficult negotiations. He had spent 20 years trading with various alien species across the galaxy. Most had been friendly or at least neutral. But the Karathi were different. They had a reputation that made even veteran space traders nervous. "Incoming transmission, Captain," Dahai announced suddenly. "It's audio only, but the translation system is working." "Put it through," Li ordered. A harsh voice filled the bridge, speaking in broken but understandable human language. "Human vessel, you will dock at Bay 7. You will bring only 4 of your people. Any weapons will result in your immediate destruction. Any sudden movements will result in your immediate destruction. Any sign of weakness will result in your immediate destruction." The transmission ended abruptly. Li looked around at his crew. They all showed signs of nervousness, but they were professionals. They had volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks. "Well, that was friendly," Minsu said quietly. "Stay calm, everyone," Li said. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. Tae-ho, you're with me. Dahai and Minsu, you too. The rest of the crew stays on the ship and keeps the engines ready." The docking process took 30 minutes. The Karathi station was enormous, easily 10 times larger than any human space station. Its dark metal surface was covered with weapon towers and sensor arrays. Strange symbols glowed with red light along its hull. When the New Dawn finally connected to docking Bay 7, Li and his team prepared to disembark. They wore their best diplomatic uniforms and carried no weapons, as instructed. Li carried only a small bag containing gifts from Earth, samples of human art, music, and food. The airlock opened with a loud hiss. Beyond it was a corridor that seemed designed for beings much larger than humans. The ceiling was at least 4 meters high, and the walls were made of dark metal with sharp edges. Strange lights cast eerie shadows everywhere. "Stay close together," Li whispered to his team. "Remember, we're here to make friends, not enemies." They walked down the corridor for several minutes before reaching a large chamber. The room was filled with alien beings unlike anything they had ever seen. The Karathi were tall, at least 2.5 meters, with thick, muscular bodies covered in dark scales. Their heads were elongated with sharp teeth, visible even when their mouths were closed. Most impressive were the patterns of light that moved across their scales, creating shifting designs of blue and green. At the center of the chamber stood 3 Karathi, who were obviously important. Their scales showed more complex light patterns, and they wore what appeared to be armor made of polished metal. The largest of the 3 stepped forward. "I am Commander Veknash of the Karathi Border Guard," the alien said in heavily accented human speech. "You are the humans who seek audience with our empire." "Yes, sir," Li replied, stepping forward. I am Captain Li Wu-jin of the Terran Federation. We come in peace, seeking trade and friendship between our peoples. The commander's scales flashed, red for a moment. Peace? He repeated the word as if it tasted bad. Trade? These are words for the weak. The Karathi Empire does not trade. We conquer or we destroy. Li felt his team tense behind him, but he kept his voice calm. Commander, we believe our peoples could benefit from cooperation. Humans have technologies and resources that might interest your empire. In return, we would value access to your markets and knowledge. The other Karathi in the room began making sounds that Li realized were probably laughter, but it sounded more like the growling of wild animals. Commander Veknash raised his arm and the sound stopped immediately. You speak of cooperation with beings you have never met, the commander said. This shows either great courage or great stupidity. Which is it, human? Li smiled and extended, his right hand toward the commander. We believe it shows hope, sir. Among humans, we seal agreements with a gesture of trust. He kept his hand extended, palm open, in the universal human gesture of greeting. The chamber fell completely silent. Every Karathi in the room stared at Li's extended hand. The light patterns on their scales began changing rapidly, flashing between red and orange. Commander Veknash took a step backward, his own scales now glowing bright red. You challenge me? The commander's voice rose to almost a roar. You dare to challenge a Karathi warrior to combat? Li's smile faded as he realized something had gone terribly wrong. No, sir, I was offering a handshake. It's a human custom of friendship. Lies, another Karathi shouted. The human shows his fighting stance. He prepares to strike. I don't understand, Li said, quickly lowering his hand. This is how humans greet each other. It's a sign of peace. But the damage was already done. Every Karathi in the room was now displaying bright red patterns on their scales. Their hands moved to weapons at their sides. Commander Veknash spoke, into a communication device on his wrist, using rapid Karathi language that the human translators couldn't follow. The insult has been given, Commander Veknash announced. The challenge has been made. By the laws of our empire, this matter must now be brought before King Vextar himself. Commander, please. Teho stepped forward. There's been a misunderstanding. Captain Li meant no challenge. We're not warriors. We're merchants and diplomats. Merchants, who challenge Karathi honor, the commander replied. Diplomats who threaten our warriors. Your captain has made his intentions clear. Now he will face the consequences. Li felt the situation spinning out of control. Everything they had planned, all their hopes for peaceful contact, were crumbling because of a simple gesture that every human child learned before they could walk. He looked at his team and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. They were in this together. If I have given offense, I apologize, Li said formally. But I maintain that no challenge was intended. We came here seeking friendship. Commander. Veknash studied the human captain for a long moment. The red patterns on his scale slowly shifted to orange, then yellow. Perhaps you speak truth, human. Perhaps you are simply ignorant of proper behavior. But the challenge has been witnessed by the border guard. It cannot be withdrawn. What happens now? Li asked. Now we wait for King Vextar. He will decide whether your ignorance excuses your insult or whether you must answer for it with your life. The chamber fell silent again. Li and his team were escorted to a smaller room to wait. Through a small window, Li could see Karathi ships arriving at the station. Each one was larger and more heavily armed than the last. Word was spreading quickly through the empire that humans had challenged their warriors. As they waited, Li couldn't help but think about the irony of their situation. Humanity had traveled across the galaxy seeking new friends, only to accidentally declare war with a handshake. But he also thought about what Teho had told him about Karathi culture. If they valued strength and honor above all else, perhaps there was still a way to turn this disaster into an opportunity. The door opened and Commander Veknash entered with 2 guards. King Vextar approaches the station. He will arrive within the hour. Prepare yourselves, humans. You are about to meet the most powerful warrior in this part of the galaxy. Lee straightened his uniform and looked at his team. Whatever happened, next they would face it together. The mission to establish peaceful contact with the Karathi Empire had begun with the worst possible misunderstanding. But Lee was determined that it wouldn't end the same way. The floor beneath their feet vibrated as another massive ship docked with the station. Through the small window of their holding room, Captain Li Wu-jin watched as yet another Karathi vessel attached itself to the growing collection of warships surrounding them. Each new arrival was larger and more intimidating than the last. "That makes 15 ships now," Park Min-soo said quietly, counting the vessels visible through the port. "They're bringing in their entire fleet." Kim Da-hai looked up from her communication device. "I'm picking up transmissions from across their empire. Word is spreading fast about what happened. They're calling it the Great Challenge." Lee sat heavily in the metal chair that was too large for his human frame. Everything in this place was built for beings twice their size. "A handshake," he said, shaking his head. 20 years of successful first contacts, and I'm brought down by a handshake." "It's not your fault, Captain," Choi Tae-ho said, looking up from his cultural notes. "I've been studying their language patterns in the transmissions. The gesture you made apparently mimics their combat stance. When a Karathi extends his arm toward another, it means he's ready to fight." "But surely they can understand it was a mistake," Da-hai said. "We're obviously not warriors. Look at us compared to them." The door opened before anyone could answer. A young Karathi entered, much smaller than the warriors they had met earlier. His scales showed patterns of blue and silver instead of the aggressive reds they had seen before. He carried a tray of food and what appeared to be water containers. "I am Zekarim," the alien said in surprisingly clear human speech. "I serve as translator and cultural advisor to the border guard. I have brought food suitable for your species." Lee stood up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Thank you, Zekrim. I am Captain Lee. Can you tell us what's happening?" "Outside?" Zekrim set the tray down and looked around nervously. "King Vextar has arrived. His ship is the largest you can see from your window. The one with the golden symbols along its hull." Lee looked out and saw the ship Zekrim mentioned. It was enormous, easily the size of a small city. Weapon ports covered its surface like stars in the night sky. "He came personally?" "Yes." When news reached him that an alien species had challenged the Karathi Empire, he commanded his fleet to gather here. He wishes to see these humans who dare to threaten our warriors. "But we didn't threaten anyone," Min-soo protested. "We came here to trade, to be friends." Zekrim's scales shifted to show puzzlement. "Friends? This word does not translate well. You mean allies in battle?" "No," Lee said carefully. "We mean beings who help each other, who share knowledge and resources, who care about each other's well-being without fighting." The young Karathi stared at them for a long moment. "This is not possible. All relationships are based on strength. The strong rule, the weak serve, enemies are destroyed. There is no other way." Tae-ho leaned forward. "Zekrim, in your language, is there a word for helping someone without expecting anything in return?" Zekrim thought for several minutes. "There is a word, but it is considered a sign of madness. Kethmore. It means to give aid to those who cannot aid you back. It is what the mentally ill do." "That's what friends do," Lee said gently. "They help each other not because they have to, but because they want to." The confusion on Zekarim's face was clear even across species differences. His scales shifted through several color patterns rapidly. "Your people do this? You help others without gaining strength or territory?" "All the time," Da-hai said. "It's how we built our civilization. Humans working together, helping each other, sharing what we know." "This is why you are weak," Zekrim said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is why the Karathi Empire will easily defeat you." "Maybe," Lee said. "But it's also why we've survived and grown. Our weakness, as you call it, has made us strong in ways your people might not understand." Zekrim was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I must go. King Vextar will announce his decision soon. But I am curious about your strange ways. If I am permitted, I would like to speak with you again. After Zekrim left, the humans sat in worried silence. The food he had brought was actually quite good, though it tasted like nothing they had ever eaten. The water was clean and fresh. At least their captors weren't trying to poison them. An hour later, the entire station shook as something massive moved past their window. Lee looked out to see a transport ship the size of a building approaching their dock. Golden symbols covered its hull, and escort fighters surrounded it like a protective swarm. That has to be the king, Tejo said. 20 minutes later, Commander Vecnash arrived with a full escort of warriors. Humans, you will come with us now. King Vextar will see you in the Great Chamber. They were marched through corridors filled with Karathi warriors. Every alien they passed stopped to stare at the humans. Some showed aggressive red patterns on their scales, while others displayed what seemed to be curiosity in shades of yellow and orange. The Great Chamber was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Hundreds of Karathi filled tiered seating around a central arena. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat the largest being Lee had ever seen. King Vextar was a giant, even among his own people. He stood at least 3 meters tall, with broad shoulders and arms as thick as tree trunks. His scales were deeper and darker than the others, and the light patterns that moved across them were complex and hypnotic. Golden armor covered his chest and arms, and a crown of metal spikes rested on his massive head. So, the king's voice boomed across the chamber. These are the humans who dare to challenge the Karathi Empire. Lee and his team were brought to the center of the arena, directly in front of the king's platform. Lee felt like an insect under the gaze of a giant, but he had faced difficult situations before, and he forced himself to stand straight and meet the alien ruler's eyes. I am Captain Li Wu-Jin of the Terran Federation, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the vast space. We came here seeking peaceful contact between our peoples. Peaceful? King Vextar's laugh was like thunder. You extend the combat stance toward my warriors and speak of peace? Your Majesty, it was a misunderstanding. Among humans, extending the hand is a greeting of friendship, not a challenge to fight. Commander Vecnash, the king called. Show these humans how we greet friends. The commander stepped forward and bowed deeply, keeping his arms at his sides and his eyes down. This is how the Karathis show respect to those they do not wish to fight. And this? King Vextar stood and extended his own arm toward Lee, fingers spread in a gesture that looked remarkably like Lee's handshake attempt, is how we challenge our enemies to single combat. The crowd of Karathi erupted in cheers and battle cries. The sound was deafening, like being inside a thunderstorm. King Vextar raised his other hand and silence fell immediately. However, the king continued, I am told that you claim this gesture means something different among your people, that you are not warriors but traitors. That's correct, Your Majesty, Lee said. We are merchants and diplomats. We have no army, no weapons of war. We came here hoping to establish trade between our species. King Vextar studied them for a long moment. You speak truth about your weakness. I can see that you are not warriors. You carry no weapons, your bodies are soft, and you show fear even as you try to hide it. Lee felt his cheeks burn, but he remained silent. But, the king continued, the challenge was given before witnesses. In Karathi law, intention does not matter. Only action matters. You extended the combat stance toward my people. Honor demands a response. What kind of response? Lee asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. King Vextar smiled, showing teeth like daggers. Trial by combat. You will face me in single battle. If you win, your people will be granted full access to our empire. You may trade freely and establish colonies in our space. And if I lose? If you lose, your people will be forbidden from entering Karathi space forever. Any human ship that crosses our borders will be destroyed without warning. The crowd cheered again. Lee looked at his team and saw resignation in their faces. They all knew there was no way a human could defeat a Karathi king in combat, especially not one as massive as Vextar. Do I have a choice? Lee asked. Yes, King Vextar said. You may choose to refuse the combat. In that case, I will have you and your crew executed immediately for cowardice. Your ship will be destroyed, and the same ban will apply to all humans. Lee closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he saw Zekrim standing among the crowd. The young Karathi's scales showed patterns of what might have been concern or sadness. Then I accept your challenge, Your Majesty, Lee said clearly. When do we fight? You have 3 days to prepare, King Vextar announced. Choose your weapon and say your prayers to whatever gods your people worship. On the 4th day we will settle this matter with honor. As they were escorted back to their quarters, Lee heard the crowd chanting something in the Karathi language. He didn't need a translator to understand the meaning. They were calling for blood. Back in their room, his team gathered around him. Captain, Dahai said quietly, there has to be another way. Maybe there is, Lee said thoughtfully. Zekrim mentioned something about their laws and customs. Maybe if we understand them better, we can find a solution that doesn't involve anyone dying. You're not seriously thinking of fighting that giant, Minsu said. Lee looked out the window at the massive fleet surrounding them. I'm thinking about something Zekrim said. He couldn't understand the concept of helping others without gaining strength. Maybe that's the key. What do you mean? Taiho asked. I mean, maybe the way to win this fight isn't to fight at all. Maybe it's time to show them what human strength really looks like. His team looked at him with expressions of hope mixed with fear. None of them knew what their captain was planning, but they had learned to trust his instincts over the years. If anyone could find a way out of this impossible situation, it would be Li Wu-jin. Outside their window, the Karathi fleet continued to grow as more ships arrived to witness what they believed would be the destruction of the first humans to challenge their empire. But Lee was already planning something that would surprise them all. King Vextar stood frozen with his energy sword raised high above Captain Li Wu-jin. The massive weapon hummed with deadly power, casting blue light across both their faces. The arena held its breath, thousands of Karathi warriors waiting for their king to deliver the killing blow. But something was wrong. Lee could see it in the king's eyes, in the way his massive frame trembled slightly. The confident warrior who had begun this fight was gone, replaced by someone struggling with thoughts and feelings he had never experienced before. Your Majesty, Lee said gently, you don't have to do this. I am king of the Karathi Empire, Vextar replied, but his voice lacked its usual thunder. I have never lost a battle. I have conquered 30 worlds. I am the strongest warrior in known space. Yes, you are, Lee agreed. But being strong doesn't mean you have to hurt people. True strength protects others. It doesn't destroy them. The king's sword wavered. Around them, the crowd began to murmur with confusion. Some Karathi called out for their king to end the fight, while others watched in fascination as their mighty ruler struggled with concepts they had never considered. You speak in riddles, human, King Vextar said. Strength is the ability to defeat your enemies. Power comes from making others fear you. This is the way of the universe. Lee shook his head slowly. That's one way, Your Majesty, but it's not the only way. Among humans, we have a saying. The strongest person in the room is often the one who lifts others up, not the one who knocks them down. Impossible, the king growled. If you do not strike down your enemies, they will strike you down first. But what if they're not your enemies? Lee asked. What if they could be your friends instead? King Vextar lowered his sword slightly. Friends. That word again. You keep speaking of this as if it has meaning. Lee looked around the arena, then back at the king. Your Majesty, do you have children? The unexpected question caught Vextar off guard. I have 3 sons, all warriors, all strong. Do you love them? Love? The king's scales shifted through confused patterns. I do not understand this word. Do you care about their safety? Do you want them to be happy and successful? Do you feel proud when they do well? King Vextar was quiet for a moment. Yes, of course. They are my blood. That feeling you have for your sons, that caring and protection you feel, that's love. And friendship is like that, but with people who aren't your family. The king stared at Lee as if seeing him for the first time. You feel this way about strangers? Sometimes, Lee said, and sometimes strangers become like family. That's how humans built their civilization. We started as small tribes fighting each other, just like your empire. But we learned to expand our circle of caring beyond our own blood. In the stands, Zekrim leaned forward, his scales bright with interest. He had been following every word, trying to understand these impossible human concepts. King Vextar noticed the young translator's attention. Zekrim, he called out, you have spoken with these humans. Do they speak truth about their ways? Zekrim stood nervously. Yes, my king. They do seem to care for each other in ways that make no sense by our laws. They help without expecting reward. They show concern for enemies. They speak of working together instead of ruling over others. And you believe this makes them strong? The young Karathi looked around nervously, aware that his answer could change everything. I have seen Captain Lee face you without weapons, showing no fear. I have watched his crew support him even knowing they might die. There is something powerful in their unity that I do not fully understand. King Vextar looked back at Lee. Tell me more about this human strength. Explain how weakness becomes power. Lee sat down cross-legged on the arena floor, a gesture that shocked the entire crowd. No one sat in the presence of the king, especially during combat. But instead of becoming angry, Vexatar found himself curious about this strange behavior. Your Majesty, imagine if instead of conquering those 30 worlds you had asked them to join you willingly. Imagine if you had offered them protection and friendship instead of demanding submission. They would have refused, the king said immediately. Why would they submit without being forced? Because you would offer them something better than submission, Lee explained. You would offer them partnership, a chance to be part of something greater than themselves. And if they still refused, then you would leave them in peace and find others who were interested. There are millions of worlds in the galaxy, Your Majesty. Surely some would see the value in joining a strong but fair empire. King Vextar lowered his sword completely and sat down across from Lee. The crowd gasped at this unprecedented behavior, but the king ignored them. Continue, he said. Those worlds that joined you willingly would be loyal in ways that conquered worlds never could be. They would contribute their knowledge, their resources, their skills freely because they would benefit from the partnership. Your empire would grow stronger, not through fear, but through cooperation. The king was quiet for several minutes, processing this radical idea. But what of enemies? What of those who would attack such an empire? They would face not just your armies, but the combined forces of all your willing allies. Planets that chose to join you would fight to defend their home because it truly would be their home, not just another conquered territory. Lee could see understanding beginning to dawn in the king's eyes. You're saying that willing allies are stronger than conquered subjects? Much stronger, Lee confirmed. A conquered people will rebel when they can. Willing allies will stand with you even in the darkest times. King Vextar stood and began pacing around the small circle where Lee sat. His massive footsteps echoed through the silent arena. But this requires trust. It requires believing that others will not betray you. Yes, Lee said, and trust requires courage. It's actually much braver to offer friendship than to demand submission. How so? Because when you conquer someone, you know exactly what you'll get. Obedience through fear. But when you offer friendship, you risk being rejected. You risk being hurt. It takes courage to be vulnerable. The king stopped pacing and stared at Lee. You are being vulnerable now, sitting defenseless before someone who could kill you with a single blow. Yes, Your Majesty. I'm trusting you to be better than your reputation. I'm betting my life that underneath the warrior king is someone who can see the value in a different way of living. King Vextar's scales showed rapid color changes as he processed these ideas. Red anger mixed with yellow confusion and something else, something blue-green that Zekrim had never seen on the king before. What if you are wrong? The king asked quietly. What if I am nothing more than a destroyer? Then I'll die, Lee said, simply. But I don't think I'm wrong. I think you've been strong for so long that you've forgotten there are different kinds of strength. The king sat down again, this time even closer to Lee. Tell me about your people's history. How did you learn these lessons? Lee began to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the silent arena. He told stories of human wars and the terrible costs they brought. He spoke of leaders who chose peace over victory, of enemies who became allies, of the slow, difficult process of learning to work together instead of tearing each other apart. We made many mistakes, Lee said. We fought terrible wars over resources, territory, beliefs. Millions died because we couldn't learn to share and cooperate. But eventually we realized that our greatest achievements came not from defeating others, but from helping them succeed. Give me an example, the king demanded. Two of our greatest nations were enemies for generations. They fought wars that devastated both peoples. But eventually their leaders chose to work together instead of continuing the cycle of revenge. Within 50 years, those former enemies had built the foundation of our planetary government. King Vextar was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer somehow. Human Li Wujin, you have shown me things today that I never imagined possible. You have fought me with weapons I did not know existed. What weapons, Your Majesty? Kindness, trust, hope. The king looked around at his people, thousands of warriors hanging on every word. These are not weapons we understand in the Karathi Empire. They could be, Lee said. Your people are strong and intelligent. Imagine what they could accomplish if they turned that strength toward building instead of destroying. The king stood slowly, his energy sword still held loosely in his massive hand. The crowd tensed, expecting the duel to resume. But King Vextar did something that no Karathi had ever seen their ruler do. He knelt down beside the human captain and extended his free hand, palm open, in a gesture that mirrored Lee's original handshake attempt. Human Li Wujin, he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the arena. I would like to learn more about this thing you call friendship. The arena erupted in chaos as thousands of Karathi tried to process what they had just witnessed. Their king, the mightiest warrior in their empire, had just asked to learn about kindness from a defenseless human. But as Lee reached out and gently grasped the king's enormous hand, something historic happened. Two species, two completely different ways of thinking about strength and power made contact not through violence but through understanding. The duel was far from over, but already everything had changed. The handshake between Captain Li Wujin and King Vextar lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. As their hands touched, the massive arena fell completely silent. Thousands of Karathi warriors stared in disbelief at their king, making peaceful contact with the human who had challenged their empire. King Vextar stood slowly, still holding Lee's much smaller hand in his own. His scales showed patterns of blue and silver that most Karathi had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice carried a new quality that even his own people didn't recognize. I declare this combat finished, the king announced to the arena, but I have not won through strength of arms. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karathi law was clear about combat results. Victory came through defeating your enemy, usually by death. There were no other possibilities in their understanding. Human Li Wujin has defeated me, King Vextar continued, his words causing an explosion of shocked voices throughout the arena. He has shown me a power I never knew existed. One of the king's military advisors stood up in the royal seating area. My king, the human, carries no weapons. He has not struck a single blow. How can he claim victory? King Vextar released Lee's hand and turned to face his people. He has struck many blows, General Kethvar, but not against my body. He has struck at my ignorance, my pride, my narrow understanding of what it means to be strong. The king gestured toward Lee, who still sat calmly in the center of the arena. This human faced certain death yet showed concern for my welfare. He offered kindness to someone trying to kill him. He spoke of friendship with an enemy. These actions required a courage I have never possessed. But my king, another advisor called out, he is weak, small. He has no army, no weapons, no territory. Is he weak? King Vextar asked. He stands before the most powerful military in this part of the galaxy and feels no fear. His people sent him here alone to face unknown dangers because they trusted his wisdom. His crew follows him willingly, not because they must, but because they believe in him. This is not weakness. Lee stood up and walked to stand beside the king. Your Majesty, you speak of defeat, but I see this differently. You have shown strength by being willing to listen to new ideas. You have shown courage by questioning beliefs you've held your entire life. That's not defeat. That's growth. King Vextar looked down at the human captain. You would not claim victory over me? I never wanted victory over you, Lee replied. I wanted understanding between us. I wanted to find a way for our peoples to help each other instead of fighting each other. The king was quiet for a moment, then he began to laugh. It was a deep rumbling sound that filled the arena, but it wasn't the harsh laughter of mockery they had heard before. This was something warmer, more genuine. Human Li Wujin, you have taught me something remarkable today. You have shown me that the strongest victory is the one where no one has to lose. King Vexitar turned to face his people again. My warriors, my subjects, hear me now. For generations we have believed that strength comes from conquest. We have built our empire by making others fear us. We have measured our worth by counting our enemies. His voice grew stronger as he continued. But what has this brought us? Subjects who obey only because they must. Allies who abandon us the moment we show weakness. An empire held together by fear instead of loyalty. In the stands, Zekrim watched with wonder as his king spoke words that challenged everything their society had taught them. The young translator's scales showed patterns of excitement and hope. This human has offered us something different, the king continued. He speaks of partnerships instead of conquests, of friends instead of subjects, of building together instead of tearing down. But my king, General Kethvar protested, if we show weakness, our enemies will attack. Other empires will see this as an opportunity to destroy us. King Vextar smiled, an expression that looked strange on his fierce features. General, tell me, which would be harder to defeat? An empire where every world serves only because they fear punishment? Or an empire where every world fights to protect their home because they chose to be part of it? The general thought about this for a moment. An empire of willing allies would be much stronger, my king. But how could we build such a thing? We start here, King Vextar said, gesturing toward Lee. We learn from these humans who have mastered the art of cooperation. We study their ways and adapt them to our own. Lee stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may suggest, we could begin with a simple exchange program. Some of your people could visit human worlds to learn about our societies. Some humans could come here to learn about Karathi culture and technology. You would trust us with access to your worlds? The king asked, after we threatened to destroy you? Trust has to start somewhere, Lee said, and I believe your people are capable of more than conquest. Zekrim has already shown us that Karathi can be curious, thoughtful, and kind. In the stands, Zekrim's scales flashed with pride and embarrassment at being singled out. King Vextar nodded slowly. Yes, Zekrim will be our first ambassador to the human worlds. He has already begun to understand your ways. The king looked around the arena, seeing his people with new eyes. Many showed confusion and uncertainty, but others displayed the blue-green patterns that indicated curiosity and interest. My people, King Vextar announced, today marks the beginning of a new age for the Karathi Empire. We will still be strong, but our strength will build rather than destroy. We will still be warriors, but we will fight to protect rather than to conquer. One young warrior in the crowd stood up. My king, how do we learn these new ways? We start by treating each other with the same kindness this human showed to his enemy, the king replied. We help those who need help. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. We work together to solve problems instead of fighting over them. The king turned to Li. Human captain, will you help us learn these lessons? It would be my honor, Your Majesty, Li replied. But remember, this is not about humans teaching Karathi. This is about both our peoples learning from each other. You have much to teach us about courage, loyalty, and determination. King Vextar nodded. Then let us begin this learning together. The king raised his energy sword high above his head. The crowd tensed, thinking he might resume the combat after. But instead of striking, King Vextar powered down the weapon and set it aside. I declare this duel ended with honor satisfied on both sides, he announced. Captain Li Wu-jin has proven that his people are worthy of respect and friendship. The Karathi Empire will welcome humans as partners, not subjects. The arena erupted in a mixture of cheers and confused voices. Some Karathi celebrated this historic moment, while others struggled to understand how their world had changed so quickly. Over the following months, the cultural exchange began slowly but steadily. Zekrim became the first Karathi to visit Earth, where he marveled at human cities built for cooperation rather than defense. Meanwhile, Li established the first human embassy on the Karathi homeworld, where he taught conflict resolution and cooperative problem-solving. The changes weren't easy. Many Karathi found it difficult to abandon their warrior traditions. Some humans feared that the Karathi couldn't really change their aggressive nature. But gradually, both species began to see the benefits of working together. Karathi engineering, combined with human innovation, led to breakthroughs in space travel and planetary development. Human diplomatic skills helped the Karathi rebuild relationships with species they had previously conquered. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of the Karathi Empire, they always returned to the same moment. The day when a human captain faced the most powerful warrior king in the galaxy and defeated him not with weapons or threats, but with simple kindness and the radical idea that enemies could become friends. Captain Li Wu-jin never called it a victory. He preferred to think of it as the day species discovered that their greatest strength lay not in what they could destroy, but in what they could build together. And in the peaceful years that followed, as humans and Karathi explored the galaxy side by side, that wisdom proved to be the most powerful weapon of all. The duel that began with a misunderstood handshake had ended with a real one, and the galaxy was forever changed by the simple truth that kindness could indeed triumph over force.